So there is nothing solemn about Anzac Day. From the tasteless Anzac round in the NRL to Coles shamelessly offering Anzac Bicky sales to the National War Memorial's dawn service proudly brought to you by Boeing and Raytheon to the betting industry making millions off two-up. If there was ever anything solemn about this day, rampant unchained capitalism and imperialism have surely killed it by now. But I would also make the case that the day has always been an illusion, and this country was never fought for freedom and democracy. In fact, let's have a look at that. I mean, from our very inception, 1788, the frontier wars will run until the 1930s, where British colonists and later Australian colonists will, well, you can tell what this map is. Hopefully I don't need to explain it. This is a map of all the horrors that have been inflicted on this continent in the name of colonialism, and it has nothing to do with freedom and democracy. Our first international war was the Boer War, 1899 to 1902, which was really just a civil war between colonial powers in Southern Africa, where they just wanted to see which white power would be in control of Black Africa. And the entire war is littered with massacres against Indigenous African people, but we always leave that part out of the romantic Victorian history. World War I, 1914 to 1918, this is really the Great War over colonial possessions, because this is at the point where all the colonial powers, and there's like 6 or 7 of them at this time, like superpowers, and they've been dividing the world between them. And finally they're running out of room, so they have to fight each other. This, of course, would end in the Sykes-Picot Agreement, among other agreements, which would see Britain and France basically randomly draw lines across West Asia to make up what they now call the Middle East. And all of the wars that have come since then are a direct result of Britain and France doing this. Not to mention, Britain and France would take over all of Germany's colonies after the war, and it will be the start of a new nightmare for them as they endured brutal occupation under Britain and France. And our history just remembers it as like Gallipoli in the Western Front, and this is where the solemn lest we forget comes from. But if you look at it from the colonial people's point of view, this is just the beginning of their new nightmare. So World War II, 1939 to 1945, if ever there was a good war, surely it's this one, right? I mean, the Japanese Empire and Nazi Germany are pure evil and inflicted untold misery against the people they attacked. And that's true. But that doesn't make Britain, France, and America the good guys. I mean, all that happened for most of the people who had to live under this is you just swapped out one brutal occupier for another. And just because 2 bad guys are fighting doesn't mean a good guy comes out of it, as we will see in the subsequent wars. The Korean War, 1950 to 1953. After World War II, America installs a right-wing dictator in South Korea, which is American-occupied Korea, named Chungman Rhee. He is brutal, and is actually a massive brain drain in Korea. And everyone thinks it's like people in the North fleeing South, but it was actually the other way around. Everyone in the South was fleeing to North, which at the time most people considered to be the real Korea. And this is when North Korea, of course, invades South Korea to try and unify the country. We could debate that forever. But I will still really want to focus on our actions in this, and that we basically helped America bomb and devastate the entire Korean peninsula in the name of upholding a US puppet. So if you think that this is about freedom and democracy, it's certainly not. And I think the next war exemplifies that even more. What we call the Malayan Emergency, 1950 to 1960. Our history records this as Australian troops going to fight a counterinsurgency against communist guerrillas in Malayan Peninsula. But really, this is the Malaysian War of Independence, and we were instrumental in trying to keep them down. Malaysia was trying to break away from the British Empire, and we did our utmost best to stop that from happening. And Malaya's experience under Britain is brutal. You can look up the photos from this period. They are horrific. We were certainly not the good guys, and we were not fighting for freedom and democracy. And it's amazing that this is one of those conflicts that really isn't talked about more. In fact, I'll do a whole video on it later. Anyway, let's move on to Vietnam, 1962 to 1973. Again, this is the Vietnamese fighting for their independence. They'd already kicked out the French, they kicked out the Japanese, they kicked out the French again, and then America came to take over and make them a puppet state, and we helped America do that. Thankfully, we lost that, and the people of Vietnam are finally, after so many decades of fighting, we're free. Let's move on to Somalia, 1992. After the Somalian Civil War, all the imperialist powers in the world, especially America, thought that Somalia would be the easiest imperialist fruit to pick. But the West has never understood Somalia. They don't understand Somalians. They are unconquerable. And I like to think of Somalia as like the Afghanistan of East Africa. Nonetheless, Australia was there and we tried our best to impose imperialist forces on them, as we still do today. And of course, we can move on to Australia's own little personal imperialistic endeavour, East Timor, which is 1999 to basically now. On the surface, we apparently went in to rescue the poor Timorese people from Indonesian aggression. And I'm sure it's just a coincidence then that we basically took all their resources and oil in extremely one-sided trade deals thereafter. Purely a coincidence, undoubtedly. Then there's Afghanistan and Iraq from 2001 until 2021, basically. Both of these were imperialistic wars fought by the United States, and we went in unquestioningly to support them. Why would we do that? We should probably go look at my last video. I talked about it a little bit. And of course, to this day, we support Israel. I'm not even going to touch that. It speaks for itself. So the point I'm trying to make is that none of these wars were fought for freedom and democracy. And in every single case, Australian troops on the ground has meant untold misery for the civilians whose land we end up fighting over and trying to control. So if we really wanted to honour the diggers, as this day is supposed to be about, then surely the best thing to do is to recognise the truth about our history and actually learn from it and stop glorifying imperialist wars so that we might finally see the end of them. Lest we forget. Anyway, something to think about.